philosophers throughout human history, particularly in the Greek tradition, people like Plato and Socrates and
Right.
Aristotle, um, wrote a lot about desires. Desire was a core theme of much of the Greek tradition, and many of those philosophers would talk about what they would call the difference between bedrock desires and presenting desires. And the difference between the two is a presenting desire is the thing that we say that we want, right? It's the thing that we say, I want that thing. But a bedrock desire is the actual true desire underneath it.
So, hello and welcome. Thank you for joining me on the Gift of Need podcast today. I'm Jude DiMeglio Trang, author and observer of human need in society. And this podcast seeks to address the overlooked power of need and how it shapes our behavior, our relationships, and society as a whole. And I do that with the desire to whet our appetites so that we can consider ways in which our needs are not burdens, but are opportunities and gifts. And how I do that is through having a variety of really interesting guests. My guest today is Dr. A.J. Swoboda, and we are going to be talking about human desire and the pain and challenge it creates for having a fulfilling life. Hi, A.J.
Hi, Jude. It's great to be with you today.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking your time out of your busy schedule at the university and graduation and all of that to be here and talk with us.
Honored.
AJ is the author of over a dozen books. He's an associate professor at Bushnell University in Eugene, Oregon. He is the co-host of Slow Theology podcast with Dr. Nijay Gupta and a pastor at Faith Center in Eugene, Oregon. Quite a life and a list for one person. So,
Quite a
AJ,
life. I like that. Quite a life.
are you really one person is the question.
Quite a life.
Um, would you start by telling us a little bit about your background?
Sure. Yeah. Kind of background, became a Christian when I was 16, wasn't raised in a Christian home, had a pretty radical conversion to Christianity around 16. Went to university, eventually started sensing a deeper call on my life to enter into the realm of pastoring and teaching, and started doing that. With seminary, did my PhD overseas at the University of Britain, University of Birmingham in Britain. My wife Quinn and I have been married for 23 years. My son Elliot, who's 14, and we live on a little urban farm here in Portland. We got 12 chickens, a bunch of blueberry plants, apple trees, and a dog Diggory. Yeah,
Dog
yeah,
Diggory.
yeah.
Chronicles of Narnia name,
Nice,
right?
good call. Yep.
Yeah. Oh, great. Well, today we're going to be discussing one of your most recent books, The Gift of Thorns. And it's a book that explores the essential role that desire plays in the development of our character, which I find very interesting.
Mm.
The subtitle, Jesus, the Flesh, and the War for Our Wants,
Mhm.
lets us know that these are struggles and challenges involved with desires. Now, folks, although the book is written to people of faith, I think your thoughts, AJ, touch upon topics that everyone can benefit from because we all, every human, struggle in some way with the desires in our lives. So, AJ, why don't you tell us what led you to begin thinking about and then writing about desire?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mentioned my conversion to Christianity when I was 16 years old. And when I became a Christian, one of the first parts of my life that um, I began to come to reckon with, as it were, was my sexuality. Actually, when I first started walking with the Lord, um, I had brought into my relationship with God a lot of debris from my childhood, some unchosen experiences and wounds from those early years that had a profound impact on me in those teenage years. And so, in the realm of my in the realm of my own sexual desire, that was one of the first places that the Lord really began, God began to really to speak to me and teach me. And it upon reflection, which years later, I've read the Bible enough times to know that's totally in line with the sort of thing that Jesus would do. There's a great story in John's Gospel about a woman at a well who has a conversation with Jesus, and within just a few lines, Jesus all of a sudden is talking to her about her sex life and says, how many marriages have you had? And he names it. And what's to me, one of the first things that begins to happen for people of faith is that our desires begin to become a conversation piece in our relationship with God. And I'm convinced, Jude, that often our desires in our hearts are one of the few things that we actually are willing to get into with people and with God. And I think that that's a travesty, because little shapes our life more than our desires.
Mhm. And I think about desire does not just relate to sexuality. Oh my
No.
gosh, you think about greed, you think about
Oh yeah.
there's just so many things, so many ways our desire for identity, our desire to be the head and not the tail, our desire to control everything around us. I mean, we all have those things. And
Yeah.
that's why I think this is such a poignant topic and the one that affects everyone. Again,
Mhm.
whether you're a person of faith, whether you have a different faith than our Christian faith, it doesn't matter. Desires cause us trouble
Yeah.
because they're kind of like letting the genie out of the box. They're out there, and
Yeah.
you can't. I don't find in my own life, I don't find that we can pull them back in. I think we need something beyond ourselves to do that. So
Hmm. Hmm.
how do you think our desires shape us and our character? Is it a slow process that just kind of inevitably happens over the course of our life? Or are there choices that we make along our path, small or
Mm.
big,
Hmm.
that will ultimately turn us into a person who is self-centered or other
Hmm.
focused,
Hmm.
selfish or selfless?
Yeah, there's a theologian who I read a good deal of, who talks regularly about what he calls the hidden heart. And the idea of the hidden heart is that over the course of our life, basically the things that our heart longs for eventually will shape our life to those things. That is to say that what we want, we actually end up getting.
Mm,
Meaning, like, if you spend your life making money your number one goal, it is likely that during this life you will attain the desire that you want. Our
right.
lives are shaped by our hidden hearts. Philosophers throughout human history, particularly in the Greek tradition, people like Plato and Socrates and
Right.
Aristotle, um, wrote a lot about desires. Desire was a core theme of much of the Greek tradition, and many of those philosophers would talk about what they would call the difference between bedrock desires and presenting desires. And the difference between the two is a presenting desire is the thing that we say that we want, right? It's the thing that we say, I want that thing. But a bedrock desire is the actual true desire underneath it. In the Greek tradition, there's a difference between the presenting and the bedrock desire. And I'll give you a case in point.
Okay.
You may remember back in the 1980s when John Hinckley Jr. shot Ronald Reagan
Hmm.
outside of a hotel in Washington, D.C. So Reagan survived. I think he was shot two times, but a number of people were shot. It was a big national event. But when Hinckley shot Ronald Reagan, it was assumed that Hinckley wanted the president dead. That the goal was to kill President Reagan. When in reality, upon doing their work, it was discovered uh, that there was actually a really famous actress who Hinckley had a crush on, and uh, and that Hinckley was trying to impress the person he had a crush on by shooting the president. And nobody knew this until his interview. So the presenting desires, everybody thought he wanted to kill the president, when in reality He was trying to win the desires over of an actress that he had a crush on.
Wow.
So here's the point of the whole thing. What I'm trying to say is what we say we want is not actually often the very thing that we want. You say you want a new car, more often than not, it's not the car that you want, it's the attention that the car gives you that you want. More often than not, it's not money that you want. It is the sense of security that you feel like money gives to you.
Right.
So
Right.
I think, Jude, to my point, when I read the stories of Jesus, and I've spent my life doing this, reading these stories, I'm pretty convinced that his core mission is to get to the hidden desires, the bedrock desires. What do you really want? What is the true thing that you want? And that is the place I'm convinced needs the greatest healing in our life.
And then that would explain then how little by little by little over time, those bedrock desires change us into
Oh,
and cause us to become the thing that we're desiring, right? And I
that's right.
think it was Augustine that was one of the great thinkers who first wrote about desires or loves as disordered.
That's
And
right.
Dr. Timothy Keller spoke a lot about this. It would come up repeatedly in his sermons, and how our desires or loves in and of themselves are not usually the problem. Rather, it's the place they hold in our lives and the order we place them
That's
in.
right.
Can you give us your thoughts on the inherent value of desires and maybe an example that relates to this?
Yeah. Well, desire, this is where the Christian tradition, I feel like, gets misunderstood. Desire in the Christian tradition, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, if we're going to read the entirety of the story of the Bible as our bedrock text, desire is a gift. It's not bad. You go back to Genesis 1 and 2, in the pre deception world, as it were, before the serpent comes into the garden and deceives the humans. Desire um, is blessed. It's good. I'll give you a great example of this. When in Genesis 2, for example, when God creates the man, the first human that God creates in Genesis 2 is named Adam. And the woman is not going to be created alongside the man at the same time. So he's created first. And he comes to God and recognizes, hey, God, you've given me all these animals, but I'm still missing out on somebody. These animals are not fulfilling all of my needs. So
Of
God comes
course.
to him and says, well, it is not good for man to be alone. Now, that's an interesting thing for God to say because no sin is in the world yet. And God had Adam to himself. So Adam actually was not alone in the sense that he did not have God. He had God. But it turns out that God knew that Adam needed more than just God. Adam needed a friend. He needed somebody, as Ronald Rollheiser, one of my favorite Catholic writers, tells a story. Adam needed somebody with skin on.
Great
And
phrase.
yeah, and so God creates the woman for Adam to have a friend. Now, here's what's cool about that. God does not shame Adam for wanting friendship. God does not shame Adam for wanting a companion. God does not shame Adam for wanting somebody else in the garden. God blesses it and provides it. The underlying message behind this whole thing, God was not insecure about this. God created Adam with desires that God himself wanted to fulfill. Desire is not a bad thing in and of itself. As to your point, Jude, it is not desire that's wrong. It is desire wrongly appropriated to the wrong thing. There's a writer named Jay Stringer who I've had the chance to engage with myself a bit, who wrote a book called Unwanted, and it's probably the best book on desire, sexual desire from a Christian perspective. And he has this section where he says, with every single porn addict that he has ever worked with, underneath the desire for pornography, when you dig to the bedrock desire, the deepest desire is not a desire for sin. The deepest desire underneath an addiction to pornography is a desire to feel connected to somebody.
Mm-hmm. And
Is a
sadly, pornography does exactly the opposite
for a
because
few
it
moments. Correct.
objectifies relationships and
Correct.
people.
Correct.
Exactly. And it's
His
so sad.
his point is, and I want to, is for a person who is addicted to pornography, you have to go to the underneath the desire that is good and bless that while saying that the sin and the evil is not good, but blessing the good thing. I think for most of us, Jude, underneath a lot of the things that we do that we know are not good, there underneath them very often are actually good desires.
Yes.
We
Yes.
just tend to put things on those good desires, or try to fulfill those good desires with things that in the end are not good. It's like drinking, for the thirsty person, drinking salt water. It ends up harming us.
Mm. Yes, I can see that. I mean, it's like shopping came to mind. Of
Uh-huh.
course, we need to
Yeah.
shop. And if we live in the affluent Western society, yes, we can enjoy shopping for new clothes or things for our house. But if shopping takes the place of something else or is too high up and it's gives you this
Yeah.
incredible fulfillment, you're a shopaholic. In your book, The Gift of Thorns, you use thorns to represent a world in which things don't go the way they should.
Mm.
The world that we all live in, right? The fallen world, like weeds in our garden. And when that happens, as occurs on a regular basis, those thorns cause frustration or pain. Do thorns relate to our thwarted or conflicting desires?
Mm. Well, yeah, I mean, let's talk about the image of thorns for just a moment, because it's a pretty recurring theme in, again, you're talking to a Bible theology guy. So in the story of the Bible, thorns play a very important and very interesting role in the storyline of the Bible. So, for example, in Genesis 3, when the humans are deceived in Genesis 3, God tells the man that because of his sin, he will now work the ground and it will produce thorns and thistles for you. So the image is, in a way, the image is that your work is now going to become toil. It's no longer going to be life-giving. It's not going to be the fruitful thing that you're used to. And the world is going to be a world of thorns and thistles. But what's interesting, even in the phrasing of the text, that the thorns will be for you. It's almost presented as though it is a gift, like it's for you. The thorns and thistles are for you. Now, I'm convinced, and I make the case in the book, that the image of thorns comes to full fruition in the story of Jesus, because when Jesus dies on the cross, he's recorded as wearing one thing, and that is a crown of thorns.
Mm-hmm.
So it's as though he's bearing on himself the mark of the curse. He's bearing on himself the mark of human depravity and the fall. But there's one more really important place where thorns are mentioned, and it is in Paul's writings, 2 Corinthians, where Paul says, the great apostle, he talks about what he calls a thorn in his side. Now, he never tells us what the thorn in the side is. Scholars have debated whether it was a person that was kind of frustrating him. It was a sexual desire. Some people have wondered. A friend of mine, Leonard Sweet, thinks that it was because Paul knew that he wasn't one of the original 12 disciples, and he constantly is being reminded of that. We don't know, but he says this, that there's something in his life that is a thorn in his side. And in the end, he calls it a gift. And he says, this thorn, which I prayed to Jesus to take away, please, God, take it away. Whatever it is, take it away. And the Lord won't take it away. And he says, why? To keep him from being conceited, Paul says. And he says that this thorn in the end is actually humbling him and making him a broken, contrite human being who constantly needs God. So to your question, as a 44-year-old man, I can say that when I came into the Christian faith with this struggle that I had as a teenager, I wish I could tell you that, since 16, everything has gone away. I'm perfected. None of those desires are still there. And the reality is that's not true. I'm still limping. And, Jude, you could look at that and go like, God, why haven't you taken that away? I would say that ongoing gnawing struggle has actually made me a man of prayer. I
Mm-hmm.
need God.
Yep.
It humbles me. It requires that I'm on my knees before God constantly. So in a way, I think living in a world where the thorns are all over us, it could be a great gift to make us people who once again need God.
Well, and that, I began making notes a dozen years ago about that. Uh, and that's where the Gift of Need book that I hope to see
Yes.
published soon came from, because I have found that true in my life in so many ways. And when I talk with people about, well, our 25-year-old son died of a heroin overdose, and people always say to us, how can you have faith in a loving God when something like this happens? And hey, there are worse things that have happened to people, but all of these kind of human tragedies that happen. And this question about how God can allow such things. And I point to parenthood. That's the best analogy I can come up with. Good parents don't always give their kids what they want. And many times, even though we love them, the answer has to be no. And it's not because we're selfish or stingy or we can't fulfill it. It's because we have to withhold something good in order to train them for the better good.
Yeah.
And can it be love then, is my question, that allows difficulties that can and
Yeah.
sometimes do frustrate or overwhelm our mere humanness and our desires?
Yeah. By the way, Jude, thank you for self-disclosing about your son. And if there's anybody that has had to wrestle with that very question, I'm going to bet it is you, and had to think through the ramifications of, why would God create a world where, evil can happen. I remember reading once a Jewish theologian after World War II who was asked in a public forum, how can you um, believe in a God after the Holocaust? Like, how can you believe in a God that would let that happen? And his response, which was astute and quite telling, was his response was to the person who asked, "You're asking the wrong question. The better question is, um, how did humanity let this happen?
Exactly.
You're blaming God for something. I mean, the reality is, if God never gave us choice, then we would all be angry with God for being a dictator. The sinful human heart cannot love God for who God is because we are idol making factories, John Calvin said. We only want to worship the God that we want, not the God who is. So even if God did create a world where evil could not happen, we probably all would start rebelling because we're like, he's just a controlling dictator.
Right,
So,
right.
so okay, we live in a world where God gives people choice.
Exactly.
As an American, every single American bases their entire existence on living in a world of free association, free speech, freedom of choice, and we love that freedom. And yet, when God gives us the same freedom as humans to do evil, we get really mad at God.
Yeah,
You
that's
don't
right.
get to have your cake and eat it too. Either God is a God who gives freedom, and we embrace the totality of that, or um, or we get mad at God for being a dictator. So I don't know. Would we prefer a dictator?
Right. Nobody would. Of course
I
not.
don't think so.
No,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a great framework to put in about desire and human will
Mm,
and who we blame. You know, in your book, you also then explore towards the end the reconstruction of our desires. And
mm,
one insight is that when we feel, and I'm going to quote, excuse me, when we fail to see ourselves as children desired and noticed by the Father, we end up needing others to desire and notice us to feel fulfilled. We
yes.
then place an invisible yoke on others to fill our emotional debts.
Yes.
And to me, this is called by another name. It's codependency. And,
That's so
it
true.
really, it ruins our relationships and our lives. We're very prone to it. And you wrote about reconstructing or reordering our desires and contentment. So would you elaborate on that, AJ?
Yeah, I mean, there's this great little line in one of Paul's letters, the letter to the Romans, where Paul says, "Let no debt remain outstanding." Um, and and certainly economically, when people read that passage, some people would say, that the Christian ethic would say, don't have economic debt, meaning don't take money that's not yours. And certainly that's one way to read it, and I think that's a legitimate way to read it. But I think it means all debt, and that includes emotional debt too. And what I mean is, like, don't put an invisible debt on other people to need to fill the emptiness of your own heart.
Absolutely. I could
Yeah.
not agree
Yeah.
more. It's a pressure that we just can't take. And I have had friendships starting from when I was a teenager, I
Yeah.
remember, and a young adult, where people had that pressure on me.
Hmm.
And I couldn't like put it in a category and define it. But what it caused me to do was to want to run the other direction,
Yes.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. That's right. So what's the solution? I mean, the solution to that is, and forgive me for being a little preachy here, um, but the solution to that is, I'm convinced we have to experience the unbounded, unconditional covenant love of God. I mean, because if our hearts are not filled with that love, we it's a truism, and I know a lot of people have said it, but you can't give away what you haven't received. So you can't, like, give a gift that you haven't been given. All love is regifting. I love Christmas because I'm going to get a bunch of gifts that I know next Christmas I'm just going to give away. So because I hate buying gifts, but almost all gifts are regifts. You cannot give away what you haven't received. So what do we need? We have to have the whole of our heart filled with somebody's love. I mean, we can't love ourselves enough. Um, so I would argue we have to hear the words of Jesus, the words of the Father, when the Father speaks to Jesus. This is my son whom I love, with whom I'm well pleased. I don't just love you, I'm pleased with you. And Christians have believed for 2,000 years that the words that the Father says to Jesus through faith in Jesus, we get to have in us. That is, we get to hear the Father say to us, "You're my son, you're my daughter, whom I love, with whom I'm well pleased." It is one thing, I'm a dad. It is one thing for me to tell my son that I love him. And that is very important. If I don't tell my son I love him, he will be in a therapist's office in 20 years. He needs to hear that his dad loves him. But that is not enough. He needs more than love. My son needs to know not just that his dad loves him, but that his dad is pleased with him.
Mm.
The power of love is not just the statement, "I love you." Do you feel the love of God? And when we begin to feel the affectual love of God and know it at our deepest of being, all of life is just giving it away. And unless we have that experience, I don't know if we can give it away. I don't know if
Well,
we can.
no, and I my feeling is I became a Christian as a teenager also. I was not raised in Christianity. I had no clue that Jesus had anything to do with Christmas or
Yeah.
Easter. No,
Ah,
my parents were very moral people, and but we again, I was not taught anything about the Bible or Jesus, didn't go to church or anything. And I found that as life has gone on, there was no human being on earth who could fill the hole that I had in my heart for being my being, to validate me as a person. And yes, my husband and I, who have been married for 100 years, do that a lot. We definitely, his unconditional love for me as a human has made a huge difference in my life, and his
mm.
love for God, because he does love me fairly
Mhm.
unconditionally. I mean, and I always think nobody else could have lived with me as a person, but he is not my ultimate fulfillment. And that pressure that we can put and project onto other people will just continue to be a frustration. I see it all the time in so many of my friends. It's just something that is humanly impossible to
Yeah.
fulfill.
Yeah.
Our souls were created, as Pascal has said, for there's only one person, one group of people, the Holy Family that can fill that. So, your last part of the book is the revival of our passions, where you tell us that delayed gratification is often the key to awakening and maturing our desires. Is this how you believe thorns really become a gift?
Mm. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I mean, the idea of delayed gratification is the idea um that by saying no, even temporarily, saying no to something actually helps purify our desires. Because when we act impulsively, um so that we've mentioned pornography. It's interesting that you asked that question because I've been reflecting on in one of my classes that I teach, the ethics of pornography um, in a Christian setting. One of the things that pornography does um, is I'll put it this way: the problem with pornography is not that there are bodies in it. And I could say that because guess what else has bodies in it? Song of Songs in the Bible, full of bodies, lots of bodies. Um, Sex is not a bad thing; it's a gift from God. What pornography does is there is no waiting.
Exactly.
There is no struggle, and there's no cleanup. You never see the ramifications of what happens afterwards. It is all impulsivity all the time. It never requires you to wait. Going back to that story in Genesis 2, it is very interesting to me that God, before providing the woman in the relationship to the man in the first marriage, the man had to wait for the woman. He had to go through a period of struggle and difficulty before she is created. And I think there's a case to be made that part of the reason that God requires humans to wait is because humans are so powerful. We're made in the image of God. We have a unique power, and power without restraint is very destructive. When we do not restrain ourselves, when we don't have any capacity for self-control, and we just become one big impulse button. I get that, I get that, I get that because I want that, I want that, I want that. We are seeing what that turns into. Welcome to America in the 21st century.
Wow. And to the phone and to the clicking and to social media.
Yeah.
It's something that I always say, 150 years ago, people never had to deal with this.
Yes.
If
Yeah.
you
It leaves so
wanted
much
to
longer.
have to fulfill sexual desires outside of the norms, you had to go and seek it out. You had to go to an illicit place, a place where you could have an illicit affair.
Yeah.
Now it's just, I mean, with the advent of photography, and then of course now it's just, and the inability to delay gratification, of course, that I've studied quite a bit because it
Mhm.
relates to addiction when it comes to substances. And what happened with our son is that the addiction, it just speeds up. It speeds up.
Mm,
You're
mm.
like the rat on the or the hamster on the wheel, right?
Yeah.
And it does not fulfill. And well, AJ, I think we're both just about out of time. Are there any closing thoughts you'd like to share with us about your book, The Gift of Thorns?
Well, I don't know why publishers haven't dropped everything to publish this book of yours, The Gift of Need, because it's a brilliant idea. And I would just close by endorsing the reality that having needs is not a sin and it's not a problem. And I hope that your listener, as they continue to listen to you, um, understand that very often our needs are the very most intimate place in our lives where God wants to meet us. And so, no, thanks for having me. It's been a gift being with you.
Oh, thank you, AJ. That was very kind. I appreciate it. Um, and I thank you for making the time to be with us today and talk about how the needs we all have to understand our desires and the thorns that they bring into our lives can become opportunities and gifts. And that's my heart just resonates with your book. And as we integrate those quote gifts for ourselves, we'll inevitably interact with others, which can help meet their needs. And that's my thought, is that these interactions can in turn bring joy and fulfillment to us all. It can benefit society, our smaller communities, our families. So thank you.
Thanks, Jude. Appreciate it.
All right, get a copy of AJ's book and check out AJ's work by going to ajswoboda.substack.com or his website. They'll be in the show notes, folks. And the Slow Theology podcast is on all streaming services, which is a really great podcast I've enjoyed with AJ and Mijay. The great music you're hearing right now was written and performed by Gabe Kabanda at Kabanda Music. You can find him on any streaming service. The engineer is Ray Engineering of Third Street Productions here in Tucson, Arizona. Please consider following, rating, and also sharing this podcast and subscribing to my free Substack newsletter. And leave a comment or review. I'd love to hear from you. Bye.